What's going on, guys, and welcome to another Doctor Who Classic Review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the 5th Doctor Peter Davison story, Planet of Fire. This is the second to last 5th Doctor story. It introduces Peri Brown as the new companion. It also has the departure of Turlough in this episode, so one new character in, one old character out. So it's a pretty big story in that regard. It also reintroduces Chameleon, who was featured in one other story, The King's Demons. And yeah, he features quite heavily in this story, although you don't really see him as Chameleon most of the time. He's disguised as the Master and another character called Howard for the majority of the story. So yeah, it was one that I hadn't seen before, so I was interested to see what this one would be like. I hadn't really heard a whole lot about it either. So this is Planet of Fire by Peter Grimwade. A strange signal from Earth draws the TARDIS to the island of Lanzarote, where Turlough rescues a young American girl, Peri, from drowning. Among her possessions are an artifact bearing an alien symbol, the same triangular mark that Turlough has branded into his arm. The mystery deepens when Kamelion falls under the control of a powerful mind and the TARDIS travels to the volcanic world of Sarn. As Turlough is forced to face his past, the Doctor must stop his oldest enemy from harnessing the revitalizing powers of numismatron gas. Numismatron gas? I don't know how you pronounce that. But yeah, that's the back of the DVD there. Actually quite an interesting and in-depth look into the episode there. So yeah, let's just get straight into it with the cast. So Peter Davison as the 5th Doctor. Yeah, I mean, he's pretty good in this one. There's nothing absolutely outstanding here. Quite a lot of emotional moments at the end where, this is a spoiler review, by the way, as these always are. Bit of an emotional moment at the end where the Doctor basically kills the Master, but of course, he's not actually dead. He burns, but for whatever reason, well, for the reason of we've got to keep the Master going, he's not actually dead, but at the end of this episode, as far as we know, from what we can tell, he is dead. And yeah, there is some good little moments from the 5th Doctor here, but I wouldn't say there's anything absolutely outstanding here from Peter Davison. He's good with what he's got, but there's just nothing, amazing there. Mark Strickson as Turlough, for me, is the star of the show here. I think he does a really good job. This is, of course, his final episode, and yeah, he takes a good he just takes a big responsibility and a big role in this episode. It's kind of largely about him, they've got some of his people are here. You find out a lot about his past in this one that we hadn't really known about before. We knew that he lived on Earth, but he wasn't actually human. We knew that, but we didn't really know a whole lot more than that. So really going into his backstory a lot here with his family as well. So yeah, I did quite enjoy Turlough in this episode. You've then got Nicola Bryant as Peri Brown, who is okay. This is her introduction here. I don't think she's quite mastered the American accent. Of course, Nicola Bryant is a British actress, but she's putting on an American accent for the character of Peri. Throughout her whole run, from what I've seen, she never really gets it completely. However, I do think that, from the midpoint onwards in the 6th Doctor era, I think she does it a lot better, whereas with her first few appearances, yeah, the American accent is a little bit jarring to listen to, and there are a few other American characters in this episode that are also quite jarring, but we'll get to that later. But otherwise, yeah, she does a pretty decent job, has enough to do, and is a relatively interesting character to start with. We will also just mention, because on the Wikipedia page, it's got him there, Gerald Flood as Chameleon. I mean, Chameleon himself doesn't really, as Chameleon, the robot, doesn't really have a whole lot of lines and things to do in this one, because most of the time he's either portrayed as Howard or most of the time the Master. But yeah, I do like Chameleon. I think he's an interesting character, and I do quite like what they did with him here. On to the good and the bad, starting with the good. Return of Chameleon. This is the return of Chameleon. The last Peter Davison episode that I watched was The King's Demons, and from what I remember, Chameleon was interesting in that one. I liked what they did with him, actually being the king in that one, disguised as the king. I thought that was quite interesting. That episode itself, though, I didn't really like. It was only a 2-parter, but it just felt like a completely unnecessary episode. Whereas this one, Chameleon is... Well, the Master is basically taking over Chameleon, and I like how he's all the time trying to fight the Master. Mainly trying to fight the Master when the Doctor or Peri or someone, tries to convince him that you are Chameleon, you're not, the Master's trying to take over you. it's awesome seeing that part of it. And yeah, I generally like at the end he ends up dying, because yeah, he ends up dying at the end because the Doctor basically just destroys him in the end. He's like, you're gonna have to kill me, I can't survive. So the Doctor kills him. I think that's a great moment there. So yeah, it's cool seeing Kamelion back here. Introduction to Peri, like I said before, not a whole lot to say here. She basically just gets introduced and she's there. Turlough finds her drowning, so saves her, brings her into the TARDIS, and then kind of all unfolds from there. So yeah, not really a whole lot to say on that part. Turlough saves Peri from drowning. I mean, I've just literally just mentioned that, so I won't go over that again. The Master using Chameleon as a projection of himself, and also kind of to protect himself, because we find out later on that the Master has actually been miniaturized. He's basically been doing some experiments with his miniaturization ray, miniaturization gun, and he ended up miniaturizing himself, from what I understand. So yeah, it didn't really go too well for him, and he's now miniaturized. So he's basically trying to get Chameleon to do all his dirty work for him, because he's a tiny little man that can't really do anything and has no power. So I liked that aspect of the Master in this episode. We'll get onto it later, but it is generally just kind of another master plan of, ooh, I don't really have the power that I need, oh, I'm dying or something, I need some kind of thing to prolong my life or to get myself back to normal. It's kind of one of those generic master plans. We'll get to that later though, but yeah, generally I did quite like him using Chameleon as kind of a vessel almost. Turlough has connections with Malcolm, the Chosen One. So we have this character called Malcolm. He's the Chosen One because he's got this symbol on his arm. None of the other people on this planet have that symbol. The guy doesn't really know where he came from, he doesn't know why he's got this symbol, he doesn't really know what's going on. Turlough turns up. Turlough's also got this symbol on his arm, and when he finds out that Malcolm also does, they have a little bit of a conversation. He finds out that Malcolm is actually his brother, and this mark, what it is basically, Turlough and Malcolm were both in prison at one point on their planet, and basically the reason why Turlough was fled to Earth was because he was, getting away from his planet. He was imprisoned by his planet, and this kind of symbol, I guess, is to mark the prisoners. So yeah, it was. I just thought it was really interesting seeing this bit of backstory, and that's actually my next point. That there's lots of backstory for Turlough here. So I didn't write every single little bit down, and I can't remember off the top of my head exactly what was happening, but basically his father had a ship, and this ship was his father's, and then Malcolm was his brother, and he talks about his family and stuff, and he goes all into detail of why he was imprisoned and then sent to Earth and all this sort of stuff, and it's just some really interesting backstory for Turlough. I love it when they do this sort of thing. A little bit of a shame that they bring all this backstory right at the end of his kind of era on the show, but it's also a good way to finish off his character, and he, the whole reason, or the main reason in the first place why he wanted to travel with the Doctor was because he'd kind of been exiled to Earth, and he wanted to travel, he wanted to get away from Earth because he hated it, but now he was back with his people again, back on his planet. He was now free, he wasn't going to be locked up anymore, he was free on his own planet. So yeah, I just think it's a really nice little kind of backstory and just whole story that we get for Turlough. Finally, the Doctor watches as the Master dies, in quotations. Yeah, so the Master basically goes into this flame, and it's the thing that he's been wanting to do all along because it will make him normal again. He becomes normal size, not miniaturized anymore. But then the flame changes, I guess, to from the Doctor, and he, from what I understand, burns in the flame. And the Doctor just kind of stands there and watches it and does not look happy about it, but he's like, this is kind of what's got to happen here. And it's very emotional for the Doctor, great acting by Peter Davison there. Of course, the Doctor supposedly dies here, but we all know that he doesn't. But yeah, I just really like that moment. So, for the bad, there's only a couple of points here, both of which I've somewhat talked about already. First of all, the fake American accents are awful, they really are. I don't like Peri's here. I really think that at the start of her era, she had not mastered that yet. I still don't think she did by the end, to be honest, but she was definitely a lot better in the Colin Baker era. Here, yeah, there's a lot of points where her English accent does poke through still, so that's also a little bit annoying and strange. And then you've got just the other American actors, you know, all those people by the boats and all that. Yeah, they're all putting on American accents and they sound pretty awful. The only other bad thing that I really have to say is that the Master's plan is somewhat a bit too similar to past and future plans. I think the Master just kind of has these two things. It's either he's here to take over a civilization or take over the universe and just be the almighty ruler, or his other plan, which is more like this plan, is that he's either powerless or he's lost a lot of power or he's dying and he's trying to just get back to, you know, not dying again, giving himself another life, or in this case making himself bigger again because he's been miniaturized and he has no, you know, power because of that. He needs to be back to the top and then he can go on and do his world domination shit again. So I just think the Master, especially in the classic series, because he was used so much, especially in, you know, John Pertwee's era, he kind of gets a bit old of him just, you know, doing the same sort of plans but a little bit different every time. And, you know, every time the Doctor bests him and he just never seems to give up, which, I mean, you know, credit to him where credit's due, but it does get a little bit old seeing him do the same old sort of stuff every single time. So a rating out of 10, I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. I don't think it's absolutely amazing stuff, but it's a slightly above average episode for me, which is, I think, actually a higher rating than a lot of people give this one. I think it's much better than The King's Demons, even though that's only a 2-parter, this is a 4-parter. The King's Demons just felt really pointless to me, whereas this episode has some exciting stuff. I really love the stuff with Turlough. Honestly, if there wasn't all the backstory with Turlough, I wouldn't like this one as much, but I really like that part of this. And yeah, generally, it's good. I think the Master's involvement with Kamelion is really good, but his overriding plan is just a little bit same. But otherwise, I was relatively enjoyed by this one. Sure, that's English. I relatively enjoyed this one, and yeah, a 7.5 out of 10 is what I'm going to give it. So anyway, that's going to be it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, please go ahead, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.